Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks for sticking it out throughout the day. It's been a long day in the play barn. But there's ping pong and pool and foosball for all who remain. Just wait till after our presentation, preferably. My name's Chris. I work at Pierce Conservation District. We've introduced ourselves, but go ahead.
Hi, I'm Connor. I also work at Pierce Conservation District. Environmental education.
All right, and we're going to talk about this workshop series that we got to be a part of this year.
Yeah, so earlier this year, in February, we did this really cool workshop series, Team Education for Climate Literacy series, that was for teachers throughout, was it just Pierce County?
Yeah.
So, we did that with 3 other partners. Here to tell you a little bit about our experience, how it went for us, some things we learned, and just share with you.
And it started last year. We were not part of the first year. Our partners started it without us. They invited us in this year, but they were mostly utilities educators, so surface water educators, some waste and recycling, our public utility educators in 2021. And they, like all of us, were looking for ways to be helpful and useful during this really weird time when they would normally be doing teacher workshops and being in schools, providing education, and we were in this kind of virtual teaching world. And so they were looking for a way to bring something valuable during that time. And they wanted to do it around the topics of increasing climate literacy among teachers and building their comfort level in teaching and talking about those things. So giving a lot of background knowledge on the different topics that they covered. This was kind of unique because although there were some overlaps in what we all covered, there were definitely some distinct differences, including service areas, which cities and counties have a lot more kind of strict service area boundaries than sometimes we do. And so it was kind of a unique thing for them to work this out, to how they could support each other and kind of justify spending time and resources on this, along with providing lessons and activity templates and instructions for the teachers to use in their classroom. And then finally, STEM clock hours that the teachers could receive for participating in these workshops. So that was kind of the why for this workshop series. This was something we provided to them, to the teachers that registered. This summarizes the 4 partners. So the City of Tacoma, which has its own environmental education program, Tacoma Public Utilities, which does more water and power conservation and outreach, some school and youth programming, but mostly doing conservation programs for the public. And they have a service area that's kind of a little bit amorphous because it's wherever there can be customers of that utility. There's us, Pierce Conservation District, serving virtually all of Pierce County, and then the Pierce County Environmental Educators, which serves Pierce County, but not the City of Tacoma. So that's kind of an interesting boundary. So we gave them kind of our topic areas because some of our partners do different topics than we do, service areas, so they know who to contact if they're in the City of Tacoma or somewhere else, or grade levels, and then contact information so they can then reach out to us. And this is kind of the shape it took for this year with 4 partners. We each took on a different topic of our kind of our own expertise with that climate lens incorporated. These were the summaries that we used to advertise. This is what teachers would see when they decided if they wanted to sign up for one or all of these workshop series, what they were going to get out of it, when the workshop series were. We covered things like urban forestry with the City of Tacoma. Our TPU partners did an overview of the meters that they use for water and power and how students and teachers could use that data in their classrooms. We talked about soil. And then finally, our friends at Pierce County, who do a lot of waste and recycling and consumption education, tackled the fashion and clothing industries and how our consumption trends play into climate change. So that was the snapshot of our 4 sessions here.
So just a really quick look at the structure. So like Chris pointed out, there are 4 topics, and each topic is offered twice. We had this previous slide, but there was the first one on Thursday evening and another one on Saturday mornings. They were all 90-minute workshops, all offered through Zoom. The registration we did through Smartsheet, and that was really handled by the utilities. They were going to really handle that. Share information with us. We would share it out with our teachers that we would usually. They handled all the logistics and everything with that. We had some standardized communication things, just we tried to make it as consistent as possible across all the partners. So we sent emails out at the same time as the week of, and maybe the day before, the day of. We try to make the emails as similar as possible. So quick description of what the workshop was to expect, a link to the Zoom meeting, some basic information. And then again with the clock hour coordination, this is really handled mostly by TPU again. We were just there to just kind of provide that opportunity for them to get the clock hours by the workshops, but we didn't do anything as far as actually. And then quick look at the actual workshop outline. You can see it as an example of our agenda here. Again, that was pretty consistent across most of the workshops. They might be a little bit different. Some we might have a little bit less informative, something like that. But as this was a Zoom format, we have pretty big audiences too. I think between our 2 sessions, we had 48 people. So pretty big session. So just when we started, made sure to remind everybody to stay muted if they have relevant questions. Try to use the chat as much as possible. Went over that really quick. And then since the clock hours are such a big focus with this, we tried to do a couple of things to make sure we caught everybody gets in. So about 10 minutes in, we started out in school, which ours I think was right at the time we fixed what sport they want to do, I think. Just to get an idea of how many people there, just because we could be offering the full 1.5 clock hours for people who showed up after. So that was one way to kind of gauge that. Then after that, we went through some background information, which is talk about right here, just to give context really for our activity that they would incorporate into the lessons. During that and just throughout the presentation, everyone had a lot of resources to share with them. Videos, other organizations they could go to, websites, things like that. We shared with them later. We shared our activity template with them, so I'm trying to get a demonstration what the activity was, what we hoped they would get from it, and then gave them a chance to actually do it. Then we gave them a little bit of time to also brainstorm that activity and what they want to do. Then questions, of course, things like that. At the very, very end, pretty much the last thing we did was send them a link or have a link to follow to take them to the clock hour forum, which kind of doubled as a feedback forum for us and as a way to fully get them started.
So we then jumped into the background information and trying to get kind of the just comfort level with teachers talking about soil, and in this case, mostly the organic components of soil and soil carbon, since we were doing this with a climate literacy lens. And so we, shared some of our favorite facts that we would normally talk about and teach and share in a lesson with students, since this is kind of a new topic for a lot of teachers too, not something that they touch on all that much compared to others. And so we shared, some NACD information, which has a lot of great things on their website. They have a whole curriculum for a lot of different topics, but soil being a really popular one. We showed the NRCS soil survey just quickly so they could kind of think about their school, because we had teachers from all over the county tuning in, and so they could investigate where their school is and some soil types and get familiar with that. We shared some really cool videos from YouTube that are part of the EnviroClon Soils playlist, which is a cool resource if you haven't checked that out. That's something cool to share with teachers so they can investigate each topic in a series of videos. And then finally, you'll see this one a lot. We covered it a lot, the Soil Food Web, our activity focused on soil organisms and showing students the cool things that live in and around the soil. And so we were building towards just understanding and appreciation of all the diversity of soil organisms and what it means for a healthy and tool for sequestering carbon. We also shared interesting extensions and resources for them so that way they could kind of see where they could go with this information. So that, again, the NACD soil poster contest and doing art is always a fun thing to promote. This is where we kind of directed them to the website. Connor will talk about how we moderated things and like shared all these resources quickly with all the teachers, but showing them what they could do with some of this information. Talked about this year's poster contest, which is Healthy Soil, Healthy Life, and encouraging them to get their students to participate no matter the grade level. This is where we also talked about that storyline through PEI for regenerative agriculture, since soil and soil carbon is a big part of it. We talked about how they could take this standalone lesson that we're doing and fit it into this larger picture. So just trying to paint those kind of options for them so they could see where they could take this with them.
So then our activity, like Chris mentioned, was focusing on soil organisms. And this, a lot of times when we do these soil lessons with classes, this is actually kind of part 2, but it can really stand by itself. Part 1 is mostly just the context about soil, why it's important, why we care about that. But our main goal with it was to make it a more or less standalone activity that teachers provide a little bit of that background information over, and then they can do this with the students and get them thinking about all that talk about. And as we did this, and this is again something that was consistent across all of our partner workshops, that is differentiated across more or less 2 different grades, so elementary and secondary. So, like I mentioned before, we demonstrated the lesson really quickly for them, which was sharing the instructions with them and going over a couple of soil organism slides that we had, some of the resources we shared afterwards. We then sent them breakout rooms, or rather had them choose their breakout rooms because we wanted to try and get them to pair up together so that all the first and third grade teachers would be together. On that way. We got a lot of feedback about that, which we'll talk about. Yeah, so we did that, gave them a chance to try and practice the activity, talk about the ways they might change it to their classroom, discuss ways they might take it. Then this was again a little bit later, about just the next week after both of our workshops. We actually sent all of our resources out, so everything that we shared during the presentation, lesson outlining, everything virtually that they would need for the lessons, along with some of the videos and things like that. And then just really quick, how it compared with our partner workshops. Again, they were all really similar, but some of the big things that we noticed that were, like Chris mentioned earlier, I think, that TPU did a kind of cool thing where they had some of their engineers, their water and power engineers, act as speakers, and they kind of took on most of the background. Talk about that, but then they split up their activity, had water be the focus for the younger grades and power be the focus for the, we thought was pretty interesting. And then another tool that I think they use Nearpod, which I have very much experience with, but it seemed like a really cool tool to use to kind of facilitate like a virtual workspace. So I don't know if you use it, but it seemed like a really, really cool tool. And then they had like, it seemed like a little bit more of a hands-on activity, but they use that virtual space for the. And then with ours, we tried as much as we could to make it work equally well virtually and hands-on. So I know originally when I started this, it started out as soil organism cards that would actually be handed out in class, but then with COVID and everything, that wasn't really an option. So it was really easy for us to convert it to the slideshow pretty much. Pretty much the same.
So again, the goal was to demonstrate and have the teachers practice a lesson so they could see what it looks like in action and get comfortable doing it. So we introduced it, we gave them background information, gave them instructions and kind of what we wanted them to do, and then explained the breakout rooms because we wanted most of the discussion to happen in the breakout rooms in smaller groups with teachers of like similar grade levels, so they could kind of talk about what it looks like for their students at that grade level. So we gave them the link to the slide so they could pick some organisms and study them and eventually draw and label some of them so they could get familiar. Because with the younger grades, the goal was to make this soil food web kind of as a class and have the teacher facilitate the connections and have the students grasp those, but with older students, kind of take it upon themselves to make the connections and pick a number of organisms and then create the food web themselves once they start to grasp those connections a little bit more. So that was kind of the final product or the deliverable of the lesson, was creating a soil food web with artwork, highlighting some of the connections and kind of the energy transfers as well for the older grades anyways. And then finally, because we want them to do something and make it more hands-on, we gave them the simple instructions for a Berlese funnel, which all it takes is a bottle, some mesh and soil for them to kind of see what soil organisms might come out of something either at their home, because again, this was kind of a weird time where some students were doing virtual learning, some were at school, so it was an easy project they could either do at home or the teacher could do as a demonstration in class. We talked about this one and the slate test, which was kind of a new one for us for the older grades, to look at soil aggregates and make that connection between carbon content and that kind of thing. So that was kind of the take this and put it into use and actually see real live soil organisms up close.
And this was another great outcome that we wanted from our soil lesson, which is just the art aspect. So this is really cool. This is actually from a couple of classes that I had, actually before this series, I think. But I just thought it was great to see kind of some of the different interpretations of some of the students. I think these classes were ranged from kindergarten all the way to first grade, something like that. But I just think it's great to see how one student really took a little sketch of each individual thing. Some of them made it a more of a landscape, and I always made sure to mention the and Oregon. So I think I like to think that that's why I didn't group all the fungi down there. But yeah, just another really great thing to see, kind of trying to incorporate something a little bit more into the lesson.
And we wanted the teachers to see this so they could kind of picture their students doing it and see this is what another class did and what came out of it. Okay, so the main thing of why we're here today is just talk about our kind of lessons learned and experiences with this, since you all know about soil and that kind of stuff anyways. But like Connor mentioned, we had about 150 participants go through the whole process of getting the clock hours and everything. So there were, some who kind of attended, or maybe they got kicked off, or Zoom issues, or they left early, just like any Zoom session. But on average, we had about 150 for all 4 sessions. Some were repeat. I'd say many of them did more than one workshop, which is pretty cool. There were teachers of all grades, from pre-K all the way up to high school and homeschool, and kind of, community educators as well. We had at least 11 school districts. When I combed through the survey responses, we had about 11 represented, which is great. One of the interesting stats though was that it was very elementary heavy. About 80% of the teachers that were there identified as elementary teachers. So that was kind of an interesting thing. We knew that going in a little bit through registration, that we were gonna have to gear our breakout rooms towards the elementary and make more of those, but just seeing that skewed of a number was kind of interesting for us.
And then some other cases we had. One of our partners actually brought up a really good point that across all of the sessions we had, a couple of hundred people signed up for at least one workshop. So just pointing out that there's obviously a need, obviously a desire to, and filling that role for the community, which is really great to see. And then I felt like based on some feedback we got, they just enjoyed the sessions too. Enjoyed the information that we provided, resources. So that was something that was really consistent. And as we actually were talking about in the session earlier this week, connecting with the districts and science coordinators was really key for us. That was one of the things that as soon as we got that information, some of them, our numbers just skyrocketed. We got a bunch of them. So that ended up being really important. And it's kind of the same thing building off of that is just doing this partnership is really cool because we kind of extend each other's reach. And then especially like Chris was mentioning, with at least a couple of our partners, one was really just in the city of Tacoma and the rest was everything except for the city of Tacoma. So it's nice to have a little bit more of that overlap extension of our audiences too. And then of course for the Zoom room, it was really a team effort to run and moderate the presentation. So we kind of switched those, but I was mostly moderating the chat and everything during that presentation. There's a lot of slides and that sense. But and it did really pay the effort, right? It was another thing, and it pays to not be the workshop series because we learned a lot from our other partners, especially since they had all the they gave us the idea to have the links ready on a separate document. So that way, and I put in what slides I wanted to introduce in that too. Just a really quick, easy, but really handy thing to do to make sure that it is ready.
Yeah, especially with the first one, because we had about 110 the Thursday evening, definitely larger. So we had everybody on mute. There's just no good way to have that many people talking, as great as that would be. So really utilizing the chat, being their own kind of strategic about how and what we put in the chat. We were definitely prepped for that and being able to have the links ready, anticipating their questions or giving them a sense of what's coming up next. That was the best way to kind of overcome having that number of people, also wanting it to be an interactive kind of workshop. So from the first year's feedback, the goal was to get these teachers comfortable doing the lesson. So not just kind of handing it to them, but actually showing how you prep them and what the instructions look like. And then showing them the lesson itself, although not ahead of time, because our other partners kind of warned us that if you give them ahead of time, they're just going to want to look at the lesson. They may not focus as much. So give it to them after, let them practice, go in blind, but they'll get more comfortable because they'll kind of see it from the beginning. And then also differentiating it by grade band and having more secondary lessons and elementary very different from each other, since they just teach very different age kids with different skill sets. So that was an important thing to focus on for this year. And then the breakout rooms, especially for the one with 110, because we wanted them to be in breakout rooms with similar other grades that they teach. We wanted them to pick their Zoom rooms, but with that, there's always Zoom issues or Zoom, they don't have the most updated, so they couldn't. And so we had to assign some of them. So numbers ended up being a little bit weird, even though we tried to preemptively say, well, we know 80% are elementary teachers, so let's make 8 elementary rooms and 2 secondary. So we tried to get ahead of everything, but still some rooms were a little bit smaller and they did great with it and they had really great conversations. And others, their feedback was, well, no one in my room talked, it was boring, we needed somebody to kind of facilitate, which really was just Connor trying to jump around just to make sure people got to the rooms and started, but we couldn't facilitate 10, 12 rooms at a time. So definitely fine tuning the expectations for the breakout room and the kind of how that runs would be something we'll think about for next year, because like with many of the meetings I'm sure you've been in, some breakout rooms are super great and productive and you get through a lot, and others it's kind of crickets. Just depends on kind of who you're paired with. So there's another takeaway we'll talk about in a minute about how we might kind of overcome some of those issues.
And then just some things to keep in mind as you're going through things like this. I did this on accident, but it's another graphic here, but I thought it made sense because they're like you're teaching how to teach. Talk about it. Now for this, we're how to teach. But you know, just like keep in mind what your audience is, what your goal is, with your presentation, what you're trying to get across. This is always a good thing, just like practicing to get your timing down. That's something we really focus on for this, because especially since we're trying to make it so consistent across all the workshops, trying to get that timing down. It's really main focus for us, which I think we're pretty successful. And I think, as I mentioned before, it really does work best with accessible standalone lessons. So I mentioned that this one kind of built up, but really be done by itself. And then the accessibility part, we sent out all the resources that they would need, except for the lazy funnel. That we felt was really easy to do because it's just a plastic water bottle, some HVAC material, and so forth. So, you know, just making sure that it's really easy, it's nothing too complicated. I need a lot of equipment for these lessons. And then, yeah, just some more conversation between participants. Sometimes it's really hard to get it started. Some people wanted facilitators in the room, which, I mean, unless you have your full conservation district helping, it's probably not possible. And another thought I had, and this is pure speculation, but just, you know, I felt like maybe some of the people who wanted the small rooms because they were in bigger rooms or something still bigger, the opposite. So I don't know if there is a way, technology is there to try and cap it at 10 people per room or something like that to maybe facilitate the conversation a little bit more. And again, I'm not sure the reason that they were saying. But that was, again, one of the biggest challenges for us was just those conversations and making sure that they knew what we wanted from them, able to practice, and just share ideas. That was another thing we wanted to get out of it, was that brings.
So we do plan to do this in the future and keep this going. It has been very well attended, which is great, and lots of good feedback. So just some things we're already thinking about, rotating topics. So we're not doing like soil carbon every year. Should we rotate it, or will there be different enough teachers that we can do it and just maybe improve? Other partners are having the same thoughts. You know, where do we go from there? And then kind of based on that breakdown, do we try and attract more secondary teachers and do more focused outreach, or should we just go with all, you know, the heavy elementary, or is that we really need some of this kind of context building and comfort level? Do we just focus on the elementary and not spend the time and resources writing secondary lesson if, you know, 80% of the teachers are coming from elementary? Some things that we're just thinking about for next year and questions we'll have to answer. We obviously want them to use these and go forward with them. So thinking of ways we can track how well and how often they're using them. Maybe there's additional clock hour offerings that they document their teaching in the classroom. So that way we can actually show that they're following up with these things and putting them into practice in the classroom, but then would need probably additional clock hours for to be compensated for that. And then this one I kind of wanted to put out to the floor. I mean, right now we're doing a hybrid and it's having mixed success, I would say. But virtual, we reached a lot of people. It was very smooth. Everything was at our fingertips. People from all over our county could come, very accessible. Whereas in person, going back to Annika's presentation about the impact, smaller reach, but higher impact, and just kind of the trade-offs. I kind of wanted to just put it out how people are talking about this right now as we move closer to it at least being a possibility.
Yeah, I was going to say, we do this for adult education for the native spring, and it traditionally was a 4-hour in the classroom around spring on Saturday. Saturday, and it was always really well attended. But with COVID, we moved it to virtual sessions. We used to 1 hour per evening, Mondays in March, and that was more, well attended and people from other counties. And this year, we've added an in-person field trip to the local plant nursery as kind of a option. And that's what we've done with that overall. So I think we'll continue hybrid, but I think the virtual, at least having that as some option. In areas where it's kind of spread out.
Any others?
Office struggling, we a brainstorming, 4-hour workshop, o'clock, Saturday, June, and then most pivoted to online. A couple years, and we had higher.
Yeah, that's true. Getting the signups that, if they can still sign up for the individual site visit, which doesn't require a large group or anything. It's a good thought. Yeah, I bet that's a good point. And I guess if we teach them how to bring their kids outside too, then maybe we're kind of getting there anyways. It's the kids we want to get outside ultimately. So
I think we did see some of that actually, even just with these 2 workshops, because the first one was on Thursday, and that was also, we had more in that one, so that was also considered, but both felt like we had a lot of stuff Thursday evening. And Saturday morning was maybe not quite half the size, but a lot more participation, I felt like. And I mean, there could be a lot of reasons for that. Thursday evening, classes, Saturday morning. Actually, the start time is rush, ready to go. There could be a lot of reasons. Yeah, just a little.
We'll say, but still, better. But I don't know. Thumbs up last fall. Did it.
no right answer, I guess. No silver bullet.
Well, I know for me personally, I'm more likely to attend something virtually these days, just because it's better to my schedule, and work and all that good stuff, and I'm much more likely to be engaged, and taking notes or participating in group discussions. Then I got into it, depends on what I have. If you reach out to teachers, if they come back with their fostering group, work it out, or do you want them to?
Yeah. And I know tomorrow, 8 a.m. session, I think is just like an informal chat. So we can talk more about those and other things. Is that right, Nikki? That's kind of what we're all about tomorrow. Cool. Well, let's wrap up today's, which is kind of a quick kind of final chat, I guess.
Yeah, so we wanted to kind of the way we did with our presentation then is just offer a time. I mean, some of you already brought up some things that you've already done similar to this. So if you've done something similar like this, we'd really love to hear your experience. If you have partners that you have done things like this, we'd love to hear that. to think about some of the different partners in your community that you could do something like this. Who would you target, like we talked about? Target all grades, secondary, first grade, or elementary, I should say. And then how would you divide up topics? What do you think topics would be covered? So open the floor for everybody to contribute, talk about what they would do.
There was no, everybody that was involved was a government entity, basically. And so there was really, yeah, no other funding. The clock hours were free, the STEM clock hours were free, so.
Years ago, they did. Almost three block hours.
Was the ESD the clock hour provider? Because this one, I think Pierce County was actually, they registered as the clock hour provider, and so I don't think there was a fee there. That I know of.
Why did they write that?
You all have sound of it. Yeah, the one up. So we tried to kind of capitalize on that the last 2 years because it's free for us to attend these presenters. And I don't know what it costs the teachers, but they're already there. And you know, for the fall, kind of captive audience. They give the talk hours, so that's where that helps. I'm not sure how broad.
Did you ever get a certain number of steps? So a lot of our teachers do that.
Education service, I was forgetting.
So there's one per area. That's where teachers get. Required to get a certain STEM and required to get a certain number of clock hours. STEM hours are new, so years ago, they said you have to get that from lots of and there are training in STEM. That also went to that first year. Now they're with the STEM summit and STEM. A lot of people that their clock hours, but people, at least with North Central, were so spread out. When actually where that hub is for us, so teachers in Oroville are 2.5 years worth of ESD, and so they really have appreciated doing more central locations where they get to coordinate with the schools that are closest to them. So it's been a nice, like we've not been first, but ours been teachers to talk about. Super, I struggle with, I'm excited about it. So we started writing more time for them to just talk.
You do that as part of the STEM center, or is that?
That's just something we do on the start. Yeah. But I would just like send something easier.
Yeah, and I know they're doing virtual.
And we get audience field of some. We had told the high school teachers that they could attend and that they're adaptable to all grades, but they're specifically focused on standards. And that we split them out K2, 4, 5, 6.
We have specific programs. That's how we- Okay.
Any final thoughts or questions?
Do you have your soil?
Yes, the Google Slides, we made those public as part of the lesson. So at least the teachers who attended got it. But I could also link it maybe to the end of our presentation so you could see what it looks like there. Sure. Well, thank you. Oh, yeah.
They've been, we do our own programs, but they did a fourth grade, for Orville, basket. They get everything they brought over the best teachers. Kind of not really training, but they're a nice resource for both getting on it. Their job. is to build this group. It's kind of like.
All right, so 8 a.m. tomorrow here is just kind of an informal coffee and conversation. And then 9 o'clock, we're joining with, if optionally, if you want to join the admin track for like a speaking to the press, giving interviews. Is that right? That's how I understand the session. Public speaking. Yeah, and that'll be in a different spot. That'll be in Woodpecker. So thank you for spending all day in the play barn doing education stuff. Good job, everybody.